Come with us on a voyage of ecological inquiry about the marine kelp forest ecosystem. A habitat of kelp, sea urchin, and sea otter create a most fascinating tale of ecological drama. We will attempt to take this very complex story of ecological interaction and tell the tale in a concise way. Charles Darwin in 1864 said of the kelp forest, "The number of living creatures of all orders whose existence intimately depends on kelp is wonderful."
Along the edges of the Eurasian and North American continents lie the Bering Sea, Arctic and Pacific Oceans. Coastal edges, inshore waters of the temperate and subarctic regions are home to huge kelp forests that follow from the shore to depths of 40 to 135 feet, depending on the clarity of the water. Sunlight has to reach the bottom of this ecosystem. Kelp is in the kingdom of Chromista and is in a family called brown algae or seaweed. The forest requires high energy of 5 watts of solar power per meter. That is 3 to 4 watts higher than an average environment. Members of the red alga kingdom live in both marine and fresh water. We focus on kelp forests in shallow coastal waters from Hokkaido, Japan to middle Baja California. This great arch of marine and land contact covers a large portion of the Earth's surface, so our story is about a big picture.
Kelp forest is a three-dimensional ecosystem. It reaches from the top of the water to the seafloor substrate. A single kelp individual can be 150 feet from holdfast to the tip of top blades. The frond is the term for the kelp section from holdfast to blade. A blade corresponds to the leaf of an ordinary plant. It grows out of a stipe like a branch or stem. A holdfast attaches to the earth at the seafloor, but does not work as a root because its job is just to keep the kelp in place. It has no function in nutrient uptake. Giant kelp, Macrocystis pyrifera, an 18-month cycle plant, forms large beds and forests on rocky substrate, with its dying blades and bladder pods washing onto shores. I like to stomp on it when I go to the beaches, popping the bladder pods. Its range is from the middle of Baja California, Mexico, to mid-coast California, USA. Ribbon kelp, Nereocystis lutkeiana, a perennial, colonizes the coast from central California to Japan.
Trophic ecology is the term relating to nutritional and energy movement. The producers in this system are red and green algae. They need sunlight, nutrient-rich upwelling, water temperatures of 42 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and a solid substrate. On each individual alga it lists a large, dense habitat of epiphytic algae on all parts of the frond. Numerous sessile attached filter-feeding animals such as sponges, sea squirts, mosses, and mollusks live on the kelp. More than 100,000 mobile invertebrates per square inch add to the huge populations of the first and second level consumers in this food web. A kelp ecosystem is structured in 3 layers. The surface layer consists of giant kelp blades. The middle layer is composed of stiptate kelps, which reach a few yards in height and are often densely concentrated. The substrate is covered with a benthic grouping of mixed algal species, corals, and many other invertebrate species. This completes the description of kelp as producers, with the first and second level consumers of the trophic system.
3 sea urchins, Purple, red, and white are echinoderms, consumers of kelp. Their role is the primary controller of the kelp forest density. They eat algae with 5 calcium carbonate teeth. Calcium carbonate and magnesium make a 5-part exoskeleton called a test. Skin and spines protect the test and internal organs. Reproduction is an R-type reproductive strategy of broadcast fertilization. Females spew eggs close to the seafloor, followed by male release of gametes into the sea for fertilization. This release will often occur near the surf line for better mixing. Urchins dominate first-level consumption in this food web.
Sea otters eat sea urchins. North of Point Conception to Hokkaido, Japan, this otter is the keystone species. They keep the habitat from becoming destroyed by urchin overconsumption. Otter population level and health as a species makes them the indicator species for the health of the entire kelp forest ecosystem. Hydra, the sea otter, is an attractive and playful animal. Humans regard otters as cute and cuddly, making their conservation popular. Females are distinguished from males. They are smaller. Otters breed like all mammals with a K reproduction strategy. The male bites the female's nose and holds her while coupling. Mother otters therefore have scars on their noses. Mothers are very careful of their pups, lavishing attention until the next one is born. Otters are alert during the day and forage dive, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. While resting between dives, they groom and groom and groom. The layers of their fur are their protection from cold, so they constantly tend to it. Hydra sleep by rafting with the same gender.
During the Ice Ages, humans colonized the Americas. For millennia, human impact was minimal so that the Goldilocks just right balance was maintained in the ecosystem. In Northwest America, Native Americans venerated the sea otter. In some cases, the sign of authority for the chief was an otter robe. In spiritual lore, the otter was seen as a communicator to the animal world. Humans are a species with the power to change factors that allow these ocean ecosystems to remain in stasis. In the early 1700s, European powers were busy conquering, claiming, and colonizing their empires. Russian Tsar Peter I wanted to secure his eastern borders and see what resources were in the northern Pacific Ocean. He sent Vitus Bering on an expedition to scout for an Arctic sea passage to Europe. He also wanted intelligence about what the English and Spanish were doing.
On the first expedition, Bering returned with otter and fur seal pelts, showing a valuable economic resource in marine mammals in the North Pacific. Bering led a second expedition in 1728 with enough men and supplies to establish Russian dominance from the Kuril Islands to Fort Ross, California. A fur trading company was established. Many local natives were enslaved and forced to hunt, not for subsistence, but to meet demands for pelts for profit. Harvesting of sea otters, manatee, fur seals, and whales was the primary focus of the Russian-American Company. Most species were depleted into endangered status. The manatee and one sea otter species, Anhydra macrodonta, were hunted to extinction.
Before the American Civil War, Russia was trying to get a buyer for Alaska. Was this because fur sales dropped Animal populations were getting close to depletion, and it was expensive to maintain the colonies. Negotiations continued, but it was not until 1867 that Alaska was purchased for 2.5 cents per acre, or $7 million. This transaction was called Seward's Folly in the United States. Hunting of sea otters, fur seals, and whales continued into the 20th century with greater losses in marine mammal populations. The kelp ecosystem was ignored. The concept of the great hunt was challenged at the end of the 19th century when a new notion developed. Conservation and sustainability was a new idea at the time, as national interests were redefined. Is it because of this change in thought that they became aware of species extinction due to marine mammal overhunting in the northern Pacific? Did the extinction of the passenger pigeon and the works of John Audubon fuel President Theodore Roosevelt's push for conservation, creating public awareness? Negotiations started in 1905 between Japan, England, Russia, and the U.S. to control the hunting of fur seal and otters in the northern Pacific. It took 6 years to get the parties to ratify the treaty, with the USA as enforcer of provisions. The first act of implementation was a 5-year moratorium on all hunting of sea mammals. Population estimates for the sea otters was 300,000 individuals in 1741. In 1911, the estimates were 1,500 individual otters, remaining in only 2/3 of their historic range. The current otter population is estimated to be 107,000 individuals.
The remainder of our story is about response to the ban on hunting, marine conservation, restoration projects, and the politics surrounding kelp ecosystems. The 1911 treaty was replaced in 1966 by a more restrictive treaty allowing subsistence hunting of sea otters only for Indians, Eskimos, and Aleuts. Today's otter repopulation numbers are as follows. Russian kelp forests have seen the most dramatic recovery and are considered to be the showcase for environmental restoration. The estimated pre-Great Hunt population of 25,000 otters in Russian waters was reduced to only 750 individuals. Present population is 28,000. The three populations are reaching carrying capacity.
The Alaskan population grew to 125,000 animals in 1973. The numbers had declined to 73,000 individuals by 2006. Most of the decline was in the Aleutian Islands. Although there is no proven theory about this decrease of population, speculation is that the decline is due to orca predation. Thousands of otters were killed and sickened in the 1989 Exxon Valdez oil spill in Prince William Sound. The care and treatment of the otters that lived through the experience led to treatment methods for rehabilitation. These critters lost the ability to stay warm, hypothermia, had breathing difficulties, and were subject to infections with liver and kidney problems. Their return to the wild was not very successful, as the death rate was high. Prince William Sound otter population still has not recovered. Problems exist with residual heavy oils and tars on the seafloor. In British Columbia, 89 otters were translocated into kelp forests to the west of Vancouver Island. Otters now occupy most of the island's coast, with a population of over 3,800 individuals. The Canadian government has reduced the threat status for sea otters from endangered species to a species of special concern because of this population growth. Washington's otter repopulation was accomplished with the introduction of 59 otters. 743 individuals are now reported in kelp forests on the ocean side of the Olympic Peninsula. Oregon has not had any success in repopulating. 95 otters were introduced in 1970. They have disappeared.
From a population of 50 southern sea otters at Big Sur in 1938, California otters have expanded their range and numbers. In 2007, the California population peaked at 3,026 otters. In 2012, the population was 2,700. When carcasses of otters began washing ashore in the 1990s, the future of what was a marvelous recovery story appeared threatened. Toxoplasma gondii is a protozoan parasite common in cats. Almost all rodents and mammals have had toxoplasmosis with varying levels of difficulty. Sea otters seem to be highly susceptible to infections by this parasite, especially the young and pregnant females. T. gondii is hard to destroy, so even third-stage sewer treatments will not affect it. Cat feces carry this parasite that ends up in the ocean through sewage and stormwater runoff. Consumed lower in kelp food chain, they are ultimately eaten by sea otters, resulting in infections. Where there are otters, people are encouraged to put cat feces in garbage dumps instead of the toilet. Another parasite, acanthocephalan, is an infectious agent that lives in stagnant ponds. Stormwaters flush this parasite into the ocean. Invertebrates such as sea urchins ingest these parasites and become infected. Otters become infected when they eat infected animals. The disease starts in the stomach, and in some cases, their brain swells, causing their death.
There are still many unanswered questions about factors affecting the southern sea otter. The number one question is, why do so many newborns fail to reach maturity, even with similar birth rates to other otter populations? The ecosystem is studied in depth and managed by the federal agencies, state and local governments, environmentally oriented nonprofits, and commercial users. When the Federal Fish and Wildlife originally designed the otter repopulation program, a decision was made not to locate any otters south of Point Concepcion. An agreement not to interfere with fishing and harvesting of lobsters, abalone, and urchins was reached with marine commercial parties. There were no otters introduced south of Point Concepcion.
The following events in California waters are included because of their ecological impact. Monterey Bay has a long history as a great fishery. Sardine fishing had a famous boom and bust. Starting in 1912, millions of tons of fish were caught and millions of cans were processed at Cannery Row. At one point, this fishery produced 25% of the nation's seafood catch. Sardine fishing came to an abrupt halt around 1947. Was the crash a combination of one single factor or many factors? Was it overfishing? The end of the 50-year cycle of sardine population? Wanting to get every last fish? Or not knowing, acknowledging, or heeding the maximum sustainable yield, MSY. Almost magically, sea otters began appearing in the bay that same year. Monterey City was faced with economic collapse. Before the sardines, it had been a tourist destination. Monterey civic leaders' subsequent decisions set the stage to be pioneers in the ecotourism industry. Because the Monterey Bay is so large, it has many different cities and economies. The best and biggest cannery was converted into a world-class aquarium. How did the city of Monterey generate consensus with all other interested parties around the bay and in the inland area? Advocacy by local governments, eco-friendly groups, and the scientific community, coupled with a conservation mood in the nation, established a federal marine sanctuary under the jurisdiction of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, also known as NOAA. Because the sea otter population grew, Monterey and the aquarium have become the world center for conservation and study of the sea otters.
Blowout at platform in Santa Barbara was the headline news on January 28, 1969. From almost a year until December 20th, oil was flowing into Santa Barbara Channel from Platform Alpha in a federal leasehold area run by Union Oil Company. The first and major flow lasted 41 days, producing an 800 square mile oil slick. This was the largest man-made environmental disaster known to that time. It is still ranked number 3 worldwide. No one was prepared for such an event, so it was the first big oil problem to require resolution by creative methods of cleanup. Being just south of Point Conception, no otters were involved. However, there was a tremendous die-off of fish, marine invertebrates, marine mammals, and birds. Did this disaster, Rachel Carlson's book Silent Spring, and Cleveland's, Ohio's Cuyahoga River fire result in the EPA being formed and the Clean Water Act being enacted by Congress? After effects of the spill were mitigated by many natural factors. The oil was a heavy crude, so it did not emulsify with water. There were severe winter storms happening, breaking up surface oil. Large oil-eating bacteria populations live in the waters as the seafloor has many natural oil seeps. So the event was not as devastating as subsequent events have been. The state declared a moratorium in its leaseholds, and so did the federal government many years later. Why did this disaster, that was larger than the Exxon Valdez disaster, not have the impact of that oil spill? Why does tension still exist between oil companies, federal and state government agencies, area residents, environmental groups, and the commercial maritime community about pumping and drilling oil from the Santa Barbara Channel?
The Santa Monica Bay is a huge area to the west of the Los Angeles land basin. In pre-development times, the bay had kelp patches, which were sustainable and healthy. Most of the bay seafloor is silt or sand. Where the substrate was rock, kelp grew. Today, there is little but barren exposed seafloor with occasional new kelp patches, which are inferior to the previous patches, no longer allowing the same level of organism propagation. So, what happened? Soil from the 3 surrounding mountain ranges made a large, flat, sedimentary plain. This plain is populated by 18 million people, within which sits the city of Los Angeles, with a population of 3.8 million. From 1940, the change from a primarily agricultural life to urbanization was rapid and explosively damaging to all of the native habitats. The city's Hyperion sewer plant could not even treat the 1940 population's wastewater, and by the 1980s, it did even less. Noxious smells, a dead fishery, With only some worms and mollusks living in the bay, health department beach closures, declining real estate prices, and increased medical problems were regular occurrences. The Federal Clean Water Act was now the law of the land, and the California Coastal Commission had been created by the state. Suits were filed by many parties, which resulted in court orders that ensure that the bay's water meet federal and state water standards. In the 1980s, 25 million pounds of solid waste per month was flushed into the bay. P.U. $1.6 billion was spent in the 1990s on bringing the Hyperion treatment plant to appropriate standards of level 3 tertiary treatment. 20 years later, some kelp patches are starting to grow. Do you think that a lot of pressure was applied to the city fathers? How could they have ignored the death of the Santa Monica Bay for so many years? Was public resistance to taxation a contributing factor? Would the bay have been restored today, 20 years later, without the Clean Water Act?
San Diego is known for its kelp forests. Both Point Loma and La Jolla have outstanding forests, which had been used in kelp harvesting. The San Diego locale once had a large commercial tuna fleet as well. Neither enterprise continues to use San Diego as a home port. In the 1930s through 1960s, large enough catches of albacore and tuna supported a cannery. On the seaward side of the kelp forests were good areas to catch the fish. Boats were rigged for a crew that used bamboo poles in teams to catch the fish. The 1960s saw a change, with the fleet using purse seining net systems from larger boats, which could travel the near Pacific. By the 1970s and 80s, the boats were even bigger so that they could range the whole world. Dolphins in the open ocean were part of bycatch that resulted in a massive number of dolphin deaths. These deaths activated a major movement to save the dolphins from being killed in this style of fishing. Environmentalists won the battle, getting the Department of Commerce to change the rules for sales of fish caught without dolphin protection. Why did the whole American tuna fleet move to other nations, shutting down a huge local commercial and industrial structure? Was it a more industrialized method of fishing using many boats, transport ships, and cheaper labor for canning? Was it the reduction of tuna populations in close waters or stricter limits and closures to American fishery waters? Could world economic financial strategies have been a factor? Do we know enough about marine ecology to be able to manage American fisheries in a sustainable way? Harvesting of kelp has a long history in San Diego. During the 1930s Depression, Kelco, a new company, began harvesting kelp to make algin. The sight of harvester ships close inshore was a symbol of sustainable use of kelp for many years. The company was seen as a big contributor to the economies of San Diego and California. Algin is a special additive to many products, such as paint, paper, and ice cream, to smooth out the product's texture. Kelco patents, with knowledge about chemistry and marine biology, made them the world supplier of algin. Byproducts of the production process, VOCs, volatile organic compounds, are emitted into the air. A lawsuit was filed against Kelco's parent companies, Merck and Monsanto. Why? Because the amount of smog-producing emissions was equivalent to 10,000 cars on the road per day. California Air Pollution Control, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, U.S. Department of Justice, and the San Diego Air Pollution Control District settled the suit, an administrative criminal action against Merck, the previous owner and then owner Monsanto in 1995. Settling out of court, the agreed fine was $1,900,000. An additional agreement for costly new environmental procedures at the San Diego Kelco plant and an increase of $1 million a year in sewer fees resulted in the company moving its operations from San Diego to the plant they owned in Scotland. The 77-year history of San Diego Kelco kelp harvesting ended in 2006, not due to any damage to the kelp ecosystem, but due to the economics of the new global economy. Does the fact that Kelco was a subsidiary of an international chemical company have anything to do with the closure of San Diego harvesting operations?
On our kelp exploration, we saw complete otter recovery in the wilds of eastern Russia, oil spill impact in Alaska, decreased otter health in Monterey due to pollution, compromise of kelp forests in Santa Barbara due to a major oil spill, a complete collapse of the ecosystem in Santa Monica Bay due to sewage from 3.8 million people next door in Los Angeles, and environmental law enforcement in San Diego resulting in 2 major industries moving offshore. This makes a grand story of environmental action. While traveling in India years ago, I realized that I used as much of the energy's resources as the whole village you see here. I feel the hypocrisy of being an advocate for sustainability while living at a high standard compared to most of the world's population. I am saddened by what I've seen in my life, the changes to the California of my youth. As a kid, it was orange groves for miles, abalone to pick at low tide, and a chance to find a place of quiet. A professional futurist opined just last week that if we continue our present population growth and environmental actions, by 2100, it would take 2.5 planets Earth resources to support species Homo sapiens. Your decisions in your lifetime regarding the environment will be the most important you make. Planet Earth will survive us. So what can you do to help our species survive in a sustainable way?